Sophie Bennett had always admired Aunt Gabriela, a woman whose charm, elegance, and warmth seemed to fill every room she entered. And as Sophie stepped off the train that summer in Portland, suitcase in hand, she felt the familiar mix of excitement and comfort she had always felt visiting Gabriela's grand Victorian home, with its ivy-covered walls, the soft scent of vanilla and old books, and the way the sun poured through the tall windows onto the polished wooden floors. Yet almost immediately, something felt different this time. Gabriella greeted her with a smile, just as radiant as ever, and pulled her into a tight hug. But Sophie noticed subtle changes: the quick glances Gabriella exchanged with Uncle Robert, the faint tension in their voices, the way the usually relaxed atmosphere of the house seemed to carry a quiet unease, and Sophie tried to dismiss it, telling herself that summer would be like always, filled with laughter, long walks in the garden, and the stories Gabriella loved to tell, yet a small knot of worry lingered in her chest, whispering that something was off. The first evening, Sophie wandered through the house, familiar corridors now feeling slightly foreign. And as Gabriella prepared dinner with her usual grace and attention, Sophie caught snippets of hushed conversations from other rooms, faint but urgent, leaving her curious and unsettled, a whisper of doubt threading through her thoughts. But she tried to push it aside, reminding herself that families have secrets, minor tensions that usually resolve themselves, and that Gabriella, who had always been honest with her, would never deliberately hide anything serious. Yet, as she unpacked and arranged her things in the guest room, Sophie's eyes kept wandering to small details she had never noticed before. A folded letter left casually on a side table, a phone vibrating silently in the living room, Gabriella's distracted gestures that contrasted sharply with her usual fluid confidence. And though Sophie tried to focus on the warmth of old memories, the summer nights spent reading on the porch, the kitchen full of homemade cookies and laughter, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of tension, subtle but undeniable, that made her feel like an observer in her own life. That night, as rain pattered gently against the window, Sophie lay awake, remembering the carefree days of her childhood visits, trying to reconcile them with the strange energy she had felt that day, realizing that Gabriella, the woman she had always trusted completely, might be carrying burdens or secrets she could not yet understand. And the thought made her chest tighten, a mix of concern and curiosity she could not easily shake. By the following morning, Sophie noticed more. Gabriella's polite but careful interactions with Uncle Robert, her occasional nervous smiles, the way she lingered at the door as if she had something she wasn't saying. And Sophie felt a creeping sense of unease, a feeling that the house, so familiar and safe for years, had become a stage for something she was not yet meant to see. Yet the mystery drew her in, a tension that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts race, because beneath the admiration and affection she felt for her aunt, Sophie sensed the presence of a hidden story, one that would change her perception of Gabriella forever. She spent the afternoon helping in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and arranging flowers, pretending to be occupied, while her mind circled around fragments of conversations she had overheard, glances exchanged, and a vague sense of secrecy that had not existed in past summers. And with each small sign, her curiosity intensified, building a quiet suspense in her chest as she wondered what Gabriella was hiding, what truth might surface, and whether it would shatter the image of the woman she had admired all her life. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall trees surrounding the property, Sophie watched Gabriella move through the house with grace and composure, chatting lightly with Uncle Robert and humming softly as she set the table. Yet Sophie noticed subtle shifts in her aunt's demeanor, small pauses in her voice, fleeting expressions of worry, the kind of brief moments only an attentive observer could catch. And Sophie realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that the Gabriella she had known might not be the full story, that beneath the elegance and charm there was a complexity, a tension that Sophie had never seen before, and that something in this summer would reveal more than she had anticipated. Sophie's heart raced as she considered all the possibilities, her mind spinning with questions she didn't have answers for. And while part of her wanted to dismiss her suspicions, to trust the woman who had always been her guide and friend, another part of her felt a growing awareness that the trust she had taken for granted might be tested, that the secrets lurking behind the polished exterior could change everything she thought she knew about her family and the woman she had idolized. And with that realization, Sophie felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and the unmistakable pull of a story that was about to unfold, one that promised revelations, emotional challenges, and the redefinition of the bond she had always believed unshakable, setting the stage for a summer that would forever alter the way she saw Aunt Gabriela. The next afternoon, Sophie found herself wandering through Gabriela's study, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and unease she couldn't ignore. The house unusually quiet with Uncle Robert out running errands and Gabriela busy in the kitchen. And as she opened the door, she was immediately struck by the sight of the desk, perfectly organized yet somehow holding an unexpected tension. Papers stacked neatly, a pen left uncapped, and then her eyes fell on a letter lying open, the handwriting elegant but unfamiliar in tone. And as she read the words, her heart clenched because they were tender, intimate, and deeply personal, addressed to a man she did not recognize, with phrases that carried warmth, longing, and affection that belonged to someone in love. And suddenly, the image she had held of Gabriella as a trustworthy, nurturing, untouchable figure began to shift, cracking under the weight of the undeniable truth Sophie now faced. Shock and disbelief surged through her, a mix of confusion and sorrow that made it hard to breathe, and she felt as though the walls of the house themselves were pressing in, trapping her in the quiet revelation that her beloved aunt was capable of secrecy and choices Sophie had never imagined. A betrayal, not violent or angry, but subtle, emotional, and piercing, because it threatened the foundation of the family she had always known as safe and unwavering. The letter revealed a side of Gabriella that Sophie had never considered, one of complexity, desire, and human vulnerability. And as her eyes traced every carefully written line, the words seemed to echo in the empty study, reminding her that no person is simple, no love untouched by complication, and no trust untested when secrets hide beneath the surface of smiles and laughter. Sophie's hands shook as she folded the letter back into its envelope, her mind racing with questions, doubts, and conflicting feelings because she still loved Gabriella, still admired her elegance and her warmth, but now she realized that admiration had been incomplete, built on a partial view of the woman, and that the reality included choices and emotions Sophie had never expected to encounter, choices that carried consequences she could feel pressing against her chest, a quiet ache of betrayal that was painful precisely because it was so intimate and personal, because it revealed a side of Gabriella that Sophie had trusted would never exist. The study, once a place of curiosity and comfort during childhood visits, now felt heavy and unfamiliar. Shadows of the past mingling with the stark reality of the present, and Sophie wondered how she could reconcile the memories of laughter, guidance, and support with the revelation she had just discovered. She thought of summer evenings spent talking about dreams, of afternoons reading together on the porch, of late night conversations where Gabriella had shared life lessons, and now all of it was tinged with a quiet, painful awareness that her aunt's life included hidden layers that Sophie had never seen, secrets that shifted the meaning of every gesture and word she had previously trusted. Sophie moved slowly from the study, the letter still echoing in her mind, as if the house itself had absorbed her astonishment, and every familiar corner, the staircase, the living room, the shelves lined with books and family photos, seemed to hold a new weight, as if each object bore silent witness to Gabriella's hidden life. And Sophie realized that understanding this woman would require more than admiration. It would require confronting the complexity of human choices, of love, longing, and mistakes that were neither simple nor clear cut, and that the summer ahead would demand courage, reflection, and the willingness to see someone she loved in a new, unsettling light. She spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the garden, the scent of roses mingling with the faint scent of rain, trying to process her emotions, feeling a strange mixture of sadness, disappointment, and an unexpected empathy, because while betrayal stung sharply, Sophie could sense Gabriella's humanity in the careful phrasing of the letter, the tenderness in her words, the vulnerability that spoke to desires and mistakes that belonged to the complexity of being human. And she realized that judgment alone would not bring clarity. She needed understanding, patience, and a readiness to face the truths that would inevitably come. That evening, Sophie lingered in the kitchen, While Gabriella prepared dinner, her hands busy with chopping and stirring, yet her mind replayed every line of the letter, turning over the emotions it provoked, weighing the significance of every phrase, and feeling the weight of knowledge that could not be undone, that now colored every smile, every touch, and every shared memory. And she knew that the relationship she had always considered straightforward and safe had become something fragile, layered with new realities that would challenge her trust, her perceptions, and her own understanding of love, loyalty, and human imperfection. As night fell and the house settled into quiet, Sophie remained restless, torn between wanting to confront Gabriella and wanting to preserve the image of the aunt she had always cherished, realizing that the coming days would be defined by difficult conversations, moments of reflection, and the slow unfolding of truths that could no longer be ignored. And she understood with a sinking clarity that this summer would change her, not through dramatic events or explosive conflicts, but through quiet revelation, emotional confrontation, and the unsettling recognition that people we love can hold secrets that shift everything we thought we knew, and that trust, admiration, and affection must sometimes be reevaluated in light of what the heart cannot forget. Sophie's mind raced as she imagined possible explanations, trying to reconcile Gabriella's warmth with the words of the letter, wondering if there had been loneliness, longing, or choices made from fear or desire. And she realized that life was rarely simple, that morality and love often intertwined in messy ways, and that understanding someone as complex as Gabriella would require empathy, courage, and the willingness to accept uncomfortable truths. And in that quiet tension, Sophie felt the first deep stirrings of a maturity shaped by experience, heartbreak, and the recognition that even the most cherished relationships are vulnerable to the hidden truths we cannot see until the moment they reveal themselves. That evening, Sophie tried to focus on helping Gabriella in the kitchen, arranging vegetables and stirring sauces, pretending to be busy while her mind raced with the discovery of the letter, the words still vivid in her memory, and finally, the tension became unbearable, a pressure in her chest that demanded release. So she took a deep breath, wiped her hands on a towel, and spoke, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. Aunt Gabriella, I need to ask you something. And Gabriella paused, knife in hand, her eyes meeting Sophie's with a calm but cautious expression, sensing the seriousness in her niece's tone, and Sophie felt the knot in her stomach tighten as she continued. I I found a letter. I know there's something going on. And in that moment, the kitchen felt impossibly small, the air thick with anticipation, the clatter of dishes and faint ticking of a clock growing almost loud in the silence that followed. Gabriella set the knife down gently, her shoulders relaxing slightly, but her eyes carrying a mixture of resignation and sorrow. And she spoke softly. Sophie, some truths are complicated. They aren't easy to say, and they aren't always easy to hear. And Sophie felt a wave of emotion crash over her, a blend of fear, heartbreak, and curiosity, as she realized that the person she had admired and trusted for so long was human in ways she had never fully understood, capable of choices and desires that carried consequences she had never anticipated. Gabriella gestured for Sophie to sit, and they moved to the small breakfast nook, the lamplight casting warm shadows across the table, and Gabriella's voice was gentle but steady as she explained that the letter was not meant to hurt anyone, that it was a reflection of complex emotions and human imperfection, a reminder that love, longing, and mistakes could coexist in ways that were not simple or clear cut. And Sophie listened, heart pounding, trying to reconcile the aunt she knew, the mentor, the confidant, the woman whose laughter had once filled her summers, with the woman revealed through her private, tender words. The confession was not dramatic, not angry, but full of honesty and vulnerability. And Sophie felt a mix of pain and empathy, realizing that betrayal did not always come with malice, that sometimes it was entwined with fear, desire, and the complexities of being human, and that understanding it required more than judgment. It required emotional courage and a willingness to accept uncomfortable truths. Gabriella reached across the table and took Sophie's hand, her touch steady and reassuring, an attempt to bridge the sudden gap that had opened between them, and she admitted that she had never wanted to cause harm to Sophie, to Uncle Robert, or to the family, that her choices had been private, personal, and flawed, and that the pain Sophie felt was something she deeply regretted, a natural consequence of secrets now revealed. Sophie's chest ached, not just from shock, but from the collision of love, admiration, and the sting of betrayal. The realization that the woman she had idolized was capable of human error, of hidden desires, of actions that reshaped her perception of everything she had trusted. And yet, even amid the heartbreak, there was a subtle current of understanding, a recognition that Gabriella's humanity did not erase the bond they shared, though it would change it irrevocably. The hours passed quietly, filled with measured conversation, soft explanations, and Sophie's tentative questions, each answered with honesty and reflection. Gabriella sharing her thoughts, fears, and regrets, and Sophie slowly piecing together the full complexity of the woman she had loved and admired for so long, understanding that people are rarely entirely what they appear to be, that love is complicated, and that trust can be tested in ways no one anticipates. As the evening wore on, Sophie felt her emotions shift from disbelief to sorrow, from sorrow to cautious empathy, realizing that while betrayal had occurred, it existed alongside layers of care, loyalty, and genuine affection that Gabriella had never lost for the family. And Sophie began to understand that life was rarely a story of absolute right or wrong, that human relationships were nuanced, and that love often required confronting the uncomfortable truth alongside the memories of joy and devotion that still existed. By the time dinner was finished, the initial shock had softened into a fragile connection, a new understanding shaped by honesty, vulnerability, and a shared recognition of human complexity. And Sophie realized that the summer would no longer be the carefree experience she had anticipated, but it could become a period of growth, of reconciliation, and of learning to see Aunt Gabriela not just as the idealized figure of her childhood, but as a multifaceted woman, capable of love, mistakes, and heartfelt reflection. Sitting across from Gabriela, Sophie felt a tentative warmth returning, a cautious trust rebuilding, as they spoke about everyday matters, family memories, and the future, realizing that while betrayal had created a crack in their relationship, it also opened a space for deeper understanding, a chance to witness honesty, vulnerability, and emotional courage firsthand. And Sophie began to accept that the aunt she loved could exist fully as both inspiring and flawed, a person whose choices were imperfect, but whose heart remained connected to hers, and that acknowledging this complexity was the first step toward healing and seeing Gabriella in a truly human, profoundly real light. The following days moved slowly, but with a new intensity. Sophie finding herself thinking constantly about Gabriella, about the letter, and about the fragile truth that had been revealed. And as she observed her aunt more closely, she began to notice subtleties that she had never truly appreciated before. The careful way Gabriella moved through the house, the small gestures of thoughtfulness toward family, the quiet attention she gave to Sophie when she spoke, all of which reminded her that even flawed choices did not erase love, and that human beings could be both admirable and imperfect at the same time, capable of mistakes yet still deserving of understanding. Sophie realized that her initial shock and hurt had softened into a cautious empathy, a recognition that betrayal did not always come from malice, but from the complexities of desire, emotion, and circumstance, and that navigating these complexities required patience, reflection, and an openness to see beyond the surface of what appeared simple or ideal. Each evening, Sophie and Gabriella shared small moments that felt different now, laden with awareness, yet also with the possibility of reconnection. From quietly preparing meals together to walking through the garden, the familiar sense of roses and fresh earth grounding them in the memories of summers past, while reminding them that the present required a careful, honest approach to the unspoken truths between them. Conversations became layered with meaning, subtle acknowledgments of vulnerability and regret, and Sophie felt a shift in her own heart as she began to understand that Gabriella's choices, while painful to uncover, were part of the human story, part of the way love, longing, and imperfection coexist, and that forgiving or at least accepting this reality did not diminish the bond they shared, but rather allowed it to evolve into something deeper and more resilient. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall oaks surrounding Gabriella's home, Sophie sat on the porch beside her aunt, the air warm and still, and Gabriella spoke quietly about the fears and uncertainties that had led to the decisions Sophie had read about, revealing a side of herself marked by introspection, longing, and the weight of human complexity. And Sophie listened, heart pounding, realizing that the same woman who had once seemed untouchable was also fragile in ways she had never imagined, carrying the consequences of her choices with dignity, yet burdened by the knowledge that trust had been shaken. In that quiet moment, Sophie felt tears rise, not from anger, but from understanding, from the recognition that life and love are rarely straightforward, that even the people we love most can make mistakes, and that true connection requires seeing them fully, flaws and all. As the week unfolded, Sophie and Gabriella began to rebuild their relationship with careful attention, each small gesture carrying more weight and meaning than ever before, from shared cups of tea to evening conversations in the kitchen, where words were chosen thoughtfully and the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable but reflective, allowing space for honesty, forgiveness, and renewed trust to grow. Sophie noticed how Gabriella's warmth returned naturally when she was fully seen, and she realized that empathy could coexist with disappointment, that understanding someone's humanity did not excuse betrayal, but could transform the pain into insight, compassion, and emotional growth. Sophie also spent time reflecting on her own feelings, acknowledging the mix of heartbreak, admiration, and respect she still held for Gabriella. And she understood that seeing her aunt differently did not mean losing love, but rather recognizing that people are multifaceted, capable of mistakes and courage at the same time, and that relationships are not static, but evolve with experience, honesty, and reflection. Each day, Sophie's heart became more open, her perceptions more nuanced, as she learned that the truth, even when painful, could strengthen the bond between two people who genuinely care for each other. By the end of the week, Sophie noticed a subtle shift in the household atmosphere. Laughter returned in soft, deliberate ways, shared glances carried understanding, and small gestures, passing a cup of tea, a hand on the shoulder, a warm smile, reminded her that love could endure even after trust was tested. Gabriella, too, seemed lighter, more willing to share her thoughts openly, less constrained by the fear of judgment. And Sophie realized that the act of confronting the truth, of speaking honestly and listening fully, had created a new kind of intimacy, a connection that was quieter, steadier, and profoundly more human than the idealized relationship of past summers. On the final evening before Sophie was to return to college, she and Gabriella sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. And Gabriella turned to her with a soft smile, saying, "I hope one day you can understand me, even if you can't forgive everything." And Sophie, feeling a mix of sorrow, empathy, and acceptance, nodded, knowing that understanding did not require absolution, but it did allow her to see her aunt as a whole person, flawed, courageous, loving, and deeply human. In that quiet moment, Sophie felt a sense of closure and clarity, recognizing that betrayal, though painful, had opened a path to deeper awareness, emotional maturity, and a renewed connection built on honesty, compassion, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. As Sophie packed her bags the next morning, ready to leave the house she had always loved, she looked back at Gabriella with a mixture of respect, affection, and new insight, realizing that the summer had changed everything, not by destroying their bond, but by revealing its depth and resilience, teaching her that people we love are complex, relationships require continual care, and the hardest truths often bring the most profound understanding. From that moment forward, Sophie began seeing Aunt Gabriella in a completely different light, acknowledging her flaws, her humanity, and her enduring love, understanding that true betrayal could coexist with deep affection, and that recognizing this duality was not weakness but wisdom, a lesson in empathy, emotional courage, and the enduring power of connection when hearts are willing to see, listen, and forgive.